In this lecture, we will be discussing the insertion and the updating of data in matrices. We will not be touching upon the removal of data from matrices because that's basically done using the subsetting functionality that we had learned in the previous lecture. So with that, let's get right on to it. So you can see that we have our warehouse array, and once we execute this, let's take a look at the vector here. This is our warehouse vector that we have, and it was formed by column binding a couple of columns that we had created. So if we want to update the value of a single record, we can go ahead and do that by doing warehouse 1 and typing 1 comma 2, and then going and doing this value to 10,000, and then also executing warehouse 1 after that. So you can see the new value here is 10,000, whereas the previous value was 199. And what we did there was we accessed the first row. So this row was accessed and the second column was accessed, which is right here. And we updated the value of that specific cell here. We can also update the values of a whole column. And the way that we do that is we are going to do warehouse 1 and put a comma, then put 2, and then assign a vector to it. 300, 400, 500, 600, and we can go up till 700. Now when we do warehouse 1 and we execute, we can see that all of the values in quality imported have been changed to 200, 300, 400, 500, and basically any value that was in this vector. Now if you were thinking I have made an error here, it's not actually an error. What I have done is I've used one of R's functionality of just not defining a certain row, which means that all of the rows have been defined. And if you do the same thing for column, it's going to basically catch all the columns and for a specific row. So if I do 2 comma, it's going to go to row 2 and it's going to pick up this whole record here for every single column and pick up every single value here. If I do the same thing for column, which is what I did in this case, what it does is it goes down this whole column, and for each of the rows, it selects the value of the column, and it selects the first row and matches it with the first element in this vector here, selects the second row and matches it with the second element in the vector, third row with the third element, so on and so on. So this was updating the value of a whole column. We can do one more thing where we're going to be adding a column to our warehouse table. So we'll do warehouse 1 and we'll assign to it column bind, and we're going to be picking up these following columns. We'll do warehouse 1, we'll capture all of the rows, so we'll put nothing in the row section, we'll put a comma, and then we'll put all the columns from 1 to 2, which are basically these two columns, and after that we'll put a comma, and then we'll go with our call new vector, which we're going to create in a minute. And after that we're going to assign the warehouse, and we're going to assign the rest of the columns, which will go from 3 to 4. Let's create our column new vector, and this will basically be a refunds vector, and it's going to have, say, the values of the percentage returns that were made on a certain quantity sold. So we have 3.25, we have 4.3, we have 4.25, and we can have something really small like 0.45, and we have to fill 2 more, so we'll go with 0.85 and we'll go with 6.7. So there are 6 values here, 1 for each of these rows, and when we do this column bind, we're going to put the first 2 columns. So for each row we're going to pick up these 2 columns, and in the middle right here we're going to toss in this new column, which is the refunds column, and then we're going to have the rest of these columns appended at the end of it from this statement. With that, we can take a look at warehouse 1 after we've done that manipulation, and let's run this. let's just make sure we have placed 1 here. Warehouse actually refers to a different value. And now if we do our run, we can see that in the middle, the call new, which is our refunds column, has been appended and it has been bound. And now we have a totally new warehouse one, which has the 2 columns of the previous one, the 1 column we added, and then the rest of the 2 columns from before as well. The similar aspect can be followed for adding rows. You just replace this with row bind, and you just make sure that you have changed the values such that they correspond to each and every column. And why not, let's just go ahead and do that as well. So we get some practice with the binding and subsetting. So we'll define all of the values for the records. Here we'll go with all of the columns, but we'll select, say, the first 3 of these rows, and we'll go from 1 through 3. Then we'll select all the columns by just leaving the columns area empty. Then we'll add our row new. Then we'll add our rest of the rows that we have. So we'll go from 4 all the way to 6. And again, leave the columns area empty so that we select all of the columns. And now we just have to do one thing. We have to define row new. And what row new is going to be is it's going to be another input here. So we're going to have quantity sold as 1000, quantity imported as 10,000, and the call new is going to be 4.32%. Our sales price is going to be 29.89, and the quantity left is going to be 9,000. Now if we execute the statement, let's load in our row new, let's load in our warehouse 1, and finally let's load in our warehouse. And let's do a run, and you can see that a new record has been inserted in the middle. Before we did not have this record. Now if you just count these up, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7 in the middle. So with that, let's end this lecture on insertion and updating data in matrices, and let's move to some functions that we might be interested in matrices.